Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh Ji. Today I wanted to make a video about how I came into Sikhi. There are a few different reasons why I wanted to make a video like this, but the number one reason is that I think it's really important that we get to know each other and that we share our stories. Because not everybody has this experience like I did of being able to travel or meeting people from a wide array of backgrounds, or just getting to sit and talk to people and from all over. When people see me and I look different and they say, hey, what's your story, I get to hear their side of the story too. Not everybody gets that. And one thing that I know from looking at research, and one thing that I know from talking to people is that people from different backgrounds we have more in common than we realize. Just as a general rule, people between out groups have a lot more similarities than people within in groups, right? So we have a lot to learn from each other. So usually people really don't know kind of what to make of me and my story. Some people think that I came into Sikhi because I was 3HO, which is not true. Some people think I came into Sikhi because I was coerced into it somehow, like it was a part of the terms and conditions of me getting married, which is also not true. Some people think I'm Punjabi or from India, also not true. But it's kind of a laugh because I get that response a lot from people who are from India, and they'd never seen anyone who is not Punjabi wearing the star, or at least speaking in as much Punjabi as I use, or understanding it very much. So that tends to confuse people on that one. But anyways, other people think that I was a Christian and then I converted to Sikhi afterwards, which is also not true. And sometimes when I'm able to talk a little bit about my story, people kind of make these gross oversimplifications, of the whole story. So I wanted to set the record straight a little bit and talk about some of the nuances in my story. Every now and then I meet people and they think I'm playing a part, because you'll see me at a big a big event like a Gurdwaras or a Nagakirtan or something, and or a turban tying event, and sometimes people think of this is me experiencing a novelty. Maybe he already had beer before and now he's just tying up the star for the day. I get that question a lot, but it's usually oh, this is Theg saying he's a black Sikh, and people be pull me aside, hey, are you for real? I don't think it's that hard to fathom, but it happens quite a bit. So anyways, I think when it comes to me as a Sikh, there's not anything about me that is atypical, but when you look at the Sikh community as a whole, I think it's not everyone is aware of this, especially if you come from outside of the community. Not everyone's aware of it, that non-Punjabi Sikhs are the overwhelming minority in the community, or black Sikhs especially are really, really hard to find for some reason. And then one thing that is a little bit different about me as opposed to pretty much every person I can think of that's black and a Sikh is that I have Punjabi in-laws. My wife is Punjabi, so that gives my perspective and my experience a very different angle to it. But and I have a daughter too, so that's a little bit different there. So yeah, I will talk about the rest of the specifics, I think, a little bit later on, but I guess I'll get into it for right now. So the first thing that I'll say is that when I was a kid, my family are all Christians, right? So Southern Baptist to be specific. But when when I was a kid, like, I had no interest at all in going to church or studying Christianity or anything. Like, I was a kid who was just totally aloof and falling asleep in church and didn't really care to be there. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of instability in my childhood, and so I lived with a lot of different family members. And, you know, living in a certain household or visiting someone on a certain day just meant that you're going to church with them. So it was kind of something that I just took it to be, like, it is what it is. I had zero investment in going to church. As I started getting older, you know, when I wasn't like a really small kid anymore, started growing up, then I started to question things a little bit more, and I realized, you know, pretty quickly that this was just not for me. It was never going to be for me. It's not a chance. There's never a time in my life where I self-identified as being a Christian. And that's just, I had a lot of issues with how Christianity was being practiced around me. I know for a lot of young people, like, you know, having adequate role models is kind of a big deal. That's you know, sometimes I feel like a lot of people with their spirituality, they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, because like there's some that is lacking, you know. So it's like, if you don't have that, like, a strong community that actually lives up to those ideals, you sort of fail to see where the rubber meets the road, like, you know, in terms of religions. You don't see people putting teachings into practice, like, in their daily life. You're thinking to yourself, like, what's the point of all this? It's just a big show. And like, to be fair, for some people it is, right? But not for everybody. But anyways, as I'm a little bit older now, like getting into my adolescent years, yeah, I took a lot of issue with a lot of Christian doctrine. I had a lot of questions that just weren't getting answered, and like a hypocrisy in the community, or you know, community engagement was just like, there was a lot that I didn't understand or I didn't agree with. So I was more than okay, you know, going off and doing my own thing and not having anything to do with Christianity or the church, despite that being, you know, sort of what my initial religious commitment was, like relationship was. Now, when I was, I think, 12 years old or 13 years old, I started studying Shaolin Kung Fu. And if you don't know, Shaolin is a sect of Zen Buddhism. So everything that you do in Shaolin, in terms of your physical fitness or your qigong, like you're developing your energy and like your sensory acuity, all the exercise, everything, it's all about building your character and like discipline, right? And it's really designed to make you a much better meditator, right? And I really love that about Shaolin. Like, I love that it's got this overarching, much higher purpose to it. And you know, I resonated very well with that kind of lifestyle of not just the martial arts, which had a lot of auxiliary benefits as well, but, you know, the discipline, the detachment, the meditation, you know, quieting your mind. And like in Shaolin, you have like active meditation, where you try to be completely in the moment and empty out like all of your excess thoughts, so you can really focus on everything around you and just be open. I really like that. There's an element of seated meditation as well, like zazen. And I really enjoyed that too. Like, it's quite challenging in the beginning. It takes a long time for you to get some skill in zazen. And then, you know, and then for a lot of people, even once you build up that skill to do it, like, after, it takes a while for some people to really start getting the benefits from it. But I took quite well to it, and I took it very, very seriously. All of my training, all of my meditation and everything, I took it very seriously. Another thing that I got a huge benefit out of from training Shaolin was the mentorship aspect of it, which is totally lacking. Maybe not totally, but just sort of having like the positive role models in my life, who were able to support me through what I was doing, or like see my potential and try to encourage me. Like, that was lacking for sure. There were people there who tried, I think, but their efforts were largely inadequate. I just don't think that they were the right people for me, In any case, the mentorship and everything, the whole package with Shaolin, I really fell in love with it. And so I think that I identified much more closely with Buddhism than I did with Christianity. And this sort of relationship persisted, I think, for a number of years after that, where I was really resonating towards that teachings and studying it a lot more. In any case, I started training when I was 12, and then when I was 18, I enlisted in the military. Along the way, I've been studying a lot of, lesser traditions, and I was really into psychology. I still am. Really love psychology and neurolinguistics programming, and I started studying a lot of Eastern traditions as well. I really enjoyed that. And when I enlisted in the military, a lot of that training, a lot of my learning continued. So here I am, like this young kid, just enlisted in the Army, fresh out of basic training, and I'm at my duty station, and everybody else is, going out, going to bars, partying on, nighttime or on weekends. Some people have families. Most of us didn't have any families, in the early year or two that we were there. But like, my lifestyle was so contrary to what everybody else was doing. Like, I just kept to myself, and I'm drawing pictures and writing poetry and studying like A Course in Miracles and Bhagavad Gita and Confucius, and like nobody else is doing this, right? So it was kind of an interesting dynamic that I think I was in, just being in the military. And I didn't feel out of place in the military, even though I had this super serene, kind of mindset all the time. But yeah, I learned a lot from being in the military, like a lot about my spirituality from being in the military. And like, as I think back on it, sometimes I tell people, like, if it wasn't for my experience in the military, I don't think that I would be a Sikh. Like, that's how central it was to my entire understanding of like adopting like a Sikh, not just a ret, but like the whole way of life, right? Try not to skip ahead too much. When I was in the military, and I'm studying a lot of Eastern traditions, and like, I try not to call them religions, because like it gets a little weird, like when you start looking at some of them, but so that's why I say Eastern traditions. But as I'm studying, come to find out that like by the time I found Sikhi, pretty much everything that I learned that I really loved and gravitated towards was already there, like in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So there were zero surprises, doctrinally, when it came to me learning more about what is inside of Sikh doctrine, right? Sikh scriptures and like your Sikh sort of lifestyle. But like, when it comes to things like wearing the uniform, or martial arts or seva, more of the hands-on aspects, even like Amrit Vela, like the more hands-on things, like I learned all of that stuff from the military, and like where it reinforced it in me so much that by the time I got to Sikhi, I was like, okay, this makes perfect sense. And I think that if I didn't have that training from the military, like it would be so much harder, or I think my practice of Sikhi would probably feel a lot more contrived, right? Or right now, like it feels very intuitive, to me. So anyways, I'm in the military. I do my first deployment to Iraq, which totally changed my worldview. I could probably do a separate video on that, and talk at length about it. But I did my first deployment to Iraq, then I get back, and then I'm a very different person when I get back from Iraq. I want to get out of the military, but the military didn't want to let me go yet. So I did another deployment to Afghanistan after that. And I was just not in my right headspace, I think, through Afghanistan. Like, I was such a different person, even from who I was in Iraq. But like that experience, the experience of being in theater there was, man, like I really need to talk about it more at length, I think. But I'll do that in a separate video. Suffice it to say that I was so much more mature and well-rounded, like in my worldview. And I got to the point where I was really starting to question things and look into things in a way that I hadn't before. And like I was feeling very ready to get out of the military. So anyways, I had my sights on that when I was on my second deployment. Around the same time too is when my wife and I started talking. We'd been friends for a while, quite a while. Like I met her a few months before I enlisted. Yeah, I think the year before. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, the year before I enlisted, because I enlisted in February. So 2014, yeah, I met my wife in 2014. And when I was in Afghanistan, like we started talking about, taking some next steps and, taking our relationship in a different direction. And we made it through that deployment. We had all the really heavy conversations up front, about child rearing and religion and all the really deep stuff. We had those conversations up front. We would talk for hours and hours at a time. And so anyways, we made it through the deployment. Then when I got back from the deployment, pretty shortly after we got back, I got married. So the out-processing for me, so let me explain this. When I was in the Army, I signed up my enlistment contract. My initial contract was for 4 years in the Army. Towards the end of that 4 years, I think 3 years in, I was informed that the Army was not going to let me out process and that they needed me to stay in so that I can go to Afghanistan. The reason is that my MOS, my occupation, my military occupation, had very, very few people in it. There were so few people doing my job that infantrymen were actually going through training. And then they get to their duty station and they say, you're not going to be an infantryman. You're going to do this other job. So the Army didn't really want to let me go. So they held on to me. So I did that extra year of training, and then I went to Afghanistan. And then in Afghanistan, my initial contract expired. And then I had ample time to finish the rest of the deployment and then out-process right away as soon as I got back. That out-processing takes about 3 months. And then I said, well, I don't want this to happen again. So I signed another contract to not necessarily re-enlist. It's not like there's no break in service. But I did another year and a half, I think, in the National Guard in California. So anyways, I out-processed from my duty station, traveled to Toronto because my wife is from Toronto. I helped her pack up all of her things, and we're shipping it to California because we're moving to California. And then we have a little bit of vacation time that I'm using up after my deployment. And so while we were traveling, vacationing together, like we got married before we got a place. So that marriage was like a very small ceremony. It was a court marriage. We had a friend, someone we stayed with for a few weeks in this time period, who knew a retired pastor who worked with us, did the marriage counseling. And during the marriage counseling, we were being talked to about like what is it like coming from different religious and ethnic backgrounds, and that if we ever have kids one day, like this is going to be a big deal and we really got to figure this out, because raising kids and what religion, or like, do we have enough of practical understanding of where each side of the family comes from, or what does your religion look like in practice, right? I think like I meet people from every religion who are like functional atheists. It was like, meaning like, you go to church like if it's a matter of convenience, or like a like a really auspicious kind of occasion, but like through your daily life, like there's no semblance of religious practice. Like you don't pray before you eat, you don't like anything, right? Like there's nothing like outside of maybe getting married, or like kind of the bigger ceremonies. Like you're just basically non-religious, right? I was gonna say functionally like atheist. And I see that everywhere. So it's like, that wasn't really where my wife and I were at that time. Like my wife was Christian, like she's Seventh-day Adventist. She studied quite a lot. Like she was that person that was like taking notes, like as she's studying. And, she's got her own story to tell, but she took her spirituality very seriously. Not going to church, not doing the day-to-day stuff was not where we were at that time. For me as well, like my practice was like a little bit weird, still leaning pretty heavily towards like the Buddhist side of things, of like, in my own practice of meditation and, the middle way and the Eightfold Path, and like trying to make space in my life for self-study and for contemplation, and, like going to the park and doing all of my active meditation and stuff, or zazen like in the mornings, like before sunrise and stuff like that. That was like a huge part of my life too. So because we weren't like super passive about our religious experiences, we both really needed to take some time to kind of sort it out. And we recognized that pretty early on. And then my wife was, she was in a very interesting time in her life where she was sort of transitioning away from Christianity. But I don't think we at that time really knew towards what. And so this seemed like a really clear window to say, hey, how about Sikhi again? And so because my wife was, she grew up, like she's Punjabi, grew up in a Sikh family. But again, like the lack of role models, and if you don't have proper sangat around you, like you really throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so, and I can't overstate how important sangat is for Sikhi. Like, it's hard to get anything done. Like, it's impossible to get anything done without it. So, but anyways, so she ended up running away from home when she was really young and turning towards Christianity. And Christianity really helped her out quite a lot. For years and years and years, she was taking her Christianity very seriously, and it had a lot of really positive benefits for her. So that was like kind of a win there for her. Now, she gets much older, and, she's, for a number of different reasons, she starts transitioning away from Christianity, and we're like, okay, why not Sikhi? Because when my wife, ran away from home and sort of left the entire kind of Sikh community behind, even the Punjabi community behind, there was like very little investigation of Sikhi up to that point, because like you can only get so far on your own, especially when you're a kid. And so like she didn't know very much about Sikhi before she left home. So this was her second chance to really reinvestigate things. And so we had that opportunity to do that together, where I was, totally brand new to it, and was in the beginning like a little bit blasé about what there was to learn. And like she just held my hand through the whole process of like going to the Gurdwara, and this is what everything is, and teaching me more and more and more Punjabi. And so it's like it was a pretty steep learning curve in the beginning, but after not too long, I started getting super self-conscious about this, about going to the Gurdwara and being active, not necessarily being active, but just being present in the Sikh community, right? Which I'll have to talk about in another video. I think I'm gonna get ready to wrap this one up, actually. But yeah, I was getting pretty self-conscious about, going to the Gurdwara and, meeting new people and talking to them and stuff. And this really pushed me to study a lot of stuff on my own. And I was so self-conscious. Like, I was just doing all this stuff secretly, like in my own. Like, we would like go to like these day camps and stuff at the Gurdwara, my wife and I, and like when we were still living in California. This was like 2010. We moved to California, and like I'm in the National Guard 2010. I think I got out of the National Guard 2012. But those early years, I'm just studying on my own. So I'm like, okay, who are the gurus? What's all their names, and what's the time period that we're looking at, and significant contributions, and Mool Mantar, and different ways to do Simran, etc., etc., etc. So like I'm learning like all of this foundational stuff. On like whenever there were holidays like Gurpurab or Vaisakhi, even Diwali, like that was my time to really stop and like look at the history, and of course, because I knew absolutely nothing about it. So I'm like, well, I won't say absolutely nothing, but I knew very little, very, very little about it. So that was my time to stop and like start looking into the history. And in those early years, this is when I found out pretty quickly that like in my heart I recognized almost right away that I was a Sikh. And the more that I looked into it, I was like, oh, this is everything that I've been trying to do in my life up to this point. Now it makes sense, right? Everything that I wanted for myself out of a religious experience is here now. I said, so Bana, of course, like spent so many years wearing that uniform. And even for me, like after a while, like even like this like daily recitation, right, is like for me is like a form of Bana, right? It's like kind of constantly like surrounding myself like with this practice of meditation, and like what comes out of your mouth is like very important. Then there's Bani, which like I wasn't studying Sikhi, or Guru Granth Sahib Ji, but I was studying a lot of scriptures, that were reinforcing this message that really resonated with me, which, fortunately for me, like I really hit the jackpot here. It was already what I, came to learn from Guru Granth Sahib Ji as well, so everything was there for me. It was like kind of a full package. So that, again, there were no surprises when I started reading Guru Granth Sahib Ji, to see like what the message was and looking up different teachings. Everything, I was already on board 110% previously. Okay, then there's Seva, which is of course like being in the military. Like even when I talk about being in the military, I say I served for so many years, right? And I think for a lot of civilians, like you don't even think of Seva like that, right? You don't think of Seva as your life story, right? You might think of Seva as like volunteering, like if you just grew up in the Western world like I did. You think it's like a one-off sort of activity that you might do, or like, a hobby, right? Volunteering as a hobby. You don't think of volunteering as Seva, whereas Seva is like, it's a much bigger concept, right? About giving back. It's like, this is like a big part of your life purpose is doing Seva, like giving back to the community and finding ways to serve others every day. So Seva, like I was already there, 100%. It's not new to me at all. Shastra, of course, like I've been studying, hand-to-hand combat, with different weight weapons, blunt objects and bladed objects and soft weapons as well. Like, chain whip and rope dart and 3-section staff and stuff. Like I've already been studying that since I was, 12 years old. Then when I got into the military, that's when I started using a lot of different projectile weapons, like pistols, rifles, machine guns, grenade launchers, etc., and learning like and seeing firsthand what those weapons really do to people. I feel like it's different once you study it, or like if you're actually using these weapons for what they're intended, you have a very different relationship, with weapons in general. Like there's so much more respect and humility that goes into it, right? But anyways, having that lifestyle of like pyar bar pyar and training constantly, having that mindset when you go out of like, I might need to use this, right? For me, which like, since I've been out of the military, it hasn't been very often, you know, not nearly like, of course, like nothing compares to what it's like when you're on a deployment, but it's like, for as much as I continue to train, I think because like, usually like when people see me, like nobody wants to fight when they see me, like I'm like this really massive guy. But like, I just exude this kind of calm, like no one, like, you know, I use many weapons, but you know, I think my very first weapon is this kind of serenity, and then kindness is like my thing. So, yeah, nobody really wants to fight me, but like I've seen it where there's been some really tough, like tense circumstances where like someone's like right about to fight, or like a guy and a girl arguing, and there's like a little bit of pushing and shoving going on, and then I just insert myself into that situation, and then it just dispels the whole thing. But in my mind, I'm like, this is what I train for, right? Is like to help people, to intervene, to look around. Like I know what it's like being in those situations. Nobody's coming to help, but so I was ready for it, right? And every day, like I think to myself, I might need to use this. I might need to help someone. So Shastra was already huge in my mind. And then Simran, of course, I've been doing since I was a kid. And like I just kind of turned it up to 11, I think, when I got into Sikhi, because like now it's like, it was all the time. Whereas before that, it was before sunrise or in the evenings or when I have downtime. But once I got into Sikhi, it's like kirtan or even just singing Gurbani whenever you feel like it. It's so easy to do, and it feels so good. And it was much more of a draw for me because of my experience with Simran, like just through song, than what that was like for just Simran through sitting quietly or like through active meditation, right? And I just enjoy Simran so much more than everything else that I've tried before that. So when I look at those things, Bana, Bani, Seva, Shastra, Simran, I had the full package already going into it. I was like, okay, I love this, right? This is what I've been training for, like working towards my whole life. So the rest of that story, I'm going to save it for another time. And where I'll leave it today is that the more that I talk about my story, because there's a lot of aspects to my story that are a little bit atypical, but the more that I talk about it, I start to not quite be offended, but I'm really put off by being labeled as a convert. Like in my heart, I feel like I was born as a Sikh, and just through struggle and through just pure kirpa, I was able to construct everything that, you know, I'd been searching for just on my own. And then when I found Sikhi, I was like, okay, now I get the full meal deal, right? Like I was like honored that like I found my way home, right? So I'll leave it there for today. And then in another video, I will want to talk about the actual challenges that I faced coming into Sikhi and sort of what that process was like for me. But so far, we'll just get all the background stuff out of the way in this one. And anyways, thank you so much for sticking through with me so far. Yeah, hopefully I won't wait too long to make the next video. But in the meantime, like if you guys have questions, or you know, if you want to share a bit about your experience, like feel free to reach out to me either in the comments here on YouTube, or you can find me on social media. I think I'm most active on my Instagram and Twitter. Like my Facebook is just kind of there in the background, but yeah, you can find me on social media and reach out to me, and then we can have a discussion. But thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys again soon.